dir noch angesäche, so bist du ihr aller Ehre. Was ist Wundes hier geschäche? Dass ein Magd ein Kind gebar, ihre über aller Engel Schar. Was das nicht ein Wunder gab. Er ließ sich reinet auf der
This is The New Right, a podcast for the lost arts, reclaiming the literary holy land from the heathen. This is Matt Pegas.
And this is Dan Baltic.
And
I'm
we
Curtis
are
Yarvin.
and this is
Sorry.
Curtis Yarvin. Yes.
I ruined your intro.
No, I appreciate
Go
it.
ahead,
You know,
go ahead.
it's always I sometimes overuse this line on this podcast, an introduction to a man who needs no introduction. In your case, it definitely applies. But you saved me from, well, I ended up saying it now anyway, but I kind of appreciate the just hopping in. We are here today with Curtis Yarvin, formerly known as Mencius Moldbug, and I suppose still known to some as Mencius Moldbug, the writer of Unqualified Reservations, the one of the most famous neo-reactionary blogs, and now the writer of Grey Mirror on Substack, a general socialite and man about town and writer and thinker. Curtis, welcome to the show.
Thank you. And where are you guys based? Where are you you coming from?
So we are bi-coastal. I am in New York, and Matt is in LA.
Right.
And we actually, the way we know each other is through a mutual friend of sorts, Justin Murphy. We met on Justin Murphy's forum. And just the idea for New Right arose from there.
Yeah.
Yes, we're a product of indiethinkers.org. And and I guess we both crossed paths with you, however briefly, at DeVere Ball. But we're glad to actually get you down for a show, for a recorded podcast. Yeah. I guess just to jump into it, I think most of our listeners are well aware that the aforementioned blog, Unqualified Reservations, is now available in compendium form from Passage Press. It's a very sexy book, I have to say.
It's nicely put together. I'm happy with the work they've done. It doesn't look like a shitty print on demand, blog collection. It's been, it'll look good on your shelf. All of the
looks good to read on the subway.
All the links have been, very elegantly turned into QR codes. This is anything but something somebody asked AI to slap together. And,
absolutely not.
Absolutely. I mean, it's better than, better composed, better produced than many quote unquote mainstream books that are published by like Simon and Schuster.
Sure. Well, the thing when you're doing indie publishing of any kind is you don't want to sort of fall into the trap of looking like you're Simon and Schuster. You want to do something that's sort of very professional looking, but also a little bit distinctive. And the book design on that is sort of made to look like a social science textbook from the 1950s, but also like not quite. And so it's sort of retro
but I find it futuristic at the same time, which I think is perfect.
You're never going to be like, you never want to be like slavishly sort of retro in a way that makes it look like you're actually that old, but that's not going to work anyway. That's not right. But I always like that style and period of book design.
I mean, it looks almost like a sociological textbook from the future, from like 20 or 30 years from now, which I think is very apropos to the contents. And you bring up the QR code footnotes, which that was one of the things that immediately jumped out to me as being I'm not sure if this has ever been done in any other.
I don't know that it's ever been done. I mean, the thing is, it's just like it's an example. It's sort of a good example of the kind of thing, like whether you're like making a movie or making a book or anything, like doing a successful, like serious, piece of art on sort of a really professional scale always calls for just like a level of insane perfectionism that's really like most people who are not professionals in that kind of field can't really, like, the level of perfectionism it takes to make a good movie or a good album or a good song is just like people who are not in the business of producing those things have no idea. And so when you're basically like, okay, the thing is that in terms of, and many things that have been written online have been sort of printed on paper, and then you have this problem. You've got all these scaggly semi-dead links that you're trying to pull into the paper form. What do you even do with that? How do you actually use that? And in general, the answer to a problem like that most people will take when they're doing something that is essentially, in a way, kind of a perfunctory, like, oh, we have to make this equivalent in a sense, like, doesn't, is to just, they just phone it in. And like, the sort of the attitude of like refusing to phone it in is something that's really critical sort of to any kind of art form at all. What do you guys do? Do you guys write? Do you make movies? Do you
I mean, professionally, we both have normie jobs, but we're both writers, which was a big part of how this podcast came together. Novelists. We each have a novel out, and I think we both dabble in
published by Terror House Press.
Yes, both published by
mutual friends.
And Matt has lost a lot of weight lately, hasn't he? He can't be called Fat and Morny anymore. I think that's very impressive. That's
it's always impressive.
He's like, God, he's lost probably like 100 pounds. He's like unrecognizable.
Do you know how he did it? What was the Matt Forney? Is he going to publish the like Matt Forney weight loss solution, or is it just?
It sounds like a book that he would have published 10 years ago. But
I mean, if he can put it into book form, that might be Terror House's best-selling book, possibly even beating Nutcracker, my novel. So I'll say it.
What's your novel called again? Nutcracker?
Nutcracker. It's the name of a fictional pornography aggregation site within the novel.
Got it.
It's a bit of
Nutcracker, not cracker, cranker.
Nutcracker.
Yeah.
It's a bit of for SEO, it's like best because it gets confused with Nutcracker and it gets somewhat buried. But I think it's getting enough distinction that cranker is beginning to pop up
Nutcracker, just cranker for short. And there are all these sort of things you can do with that, like the of course, every Christmas there's a Nutcracker, put on somewhere, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
You could imagine that becoming the Nutcracker, and I can
the Nutcracker holiday pageant. I love
the Nutcracker holiday pageant. Exactly. I always like this sort of there was this not that I've ever been into porn, but there, especially this is really retro porn where they'd make like porn like feature films, and they take the name of some existing thing and just twist it a little bit, and so you find yourself sitting on your couch watching A Long Day's Journey into Dwight or whatever. And I think that
it has that ring. It does have like a play on the Nutcracker.
And it just like one of the I mean, Welbeck, of course, really sort of created. Did he create this trend even? But one of the sort of the trends in this kind of new writing is Delicious Tacos does a lot of it as well. Is just like kind of wallow in the just utter like sort
depravity
of the modern world, the depravity, like
the filth,
Delicious
Tacos
loves the depravity. Have you heard this thing about Welbeck in the film? He basically as I understand it, basically he probably under the influence of some kind of drug, basically authorized these filmmakers to film him having sex with his Asian wife who's like a third his age or something, and they did so, and then he had like a change of heart. He realized how many wrinkles there are in his ass or something, not and he basically tried to take back permission from this film. Unfortunately, he like signed, the rights. So he does what anyone does, when they have nothing else to do, and he sued them. And so hopefully that, I'm scared of this movie. I mean, do I want to, is my,
I don't know.
I never really had an image of Welbeck as like stud, so
no, I don't think I'd watch.
I mean,
it either.
yeah, he's like personally disgusting, right? So I mean, is a great writer, of course, but like he just, he celebrates his disgustingness. So like, do you want to watch that? Do you want to have that experience?
It feels almost as though like he created this scenario for the artistic import of it. Because like, what could be more Welbeckian than a lawsuit by Welbeck to stop?
I know, and ideally you would have actually two film crews going. You'd have the one that would make the film, and then you had another that would document the lawsuit, and the whole thing would become this like extremely meta referential. You'd actually, I mean, has anyone done a documentary where like you have like two competing film crews, like competing by, and they're like filming each other, right? And did you see?
Yeah, I can't think of that.
I can't think of that either, although the closest thing that I know comes from something my friend Hadrian Belove showed me, which is Adiosio Tom. Do you know the film Adiosio Tom?
No. Tell me about
it's
that.
In a way, it's in a way a sequel to Africa Addio, which you might have heard of, and it's sort of the third kind of great work of the Italian directors Jacopetti and Prosperi. Now, Jacopetti and Prosperi got their start in the 50s, basically shooting like sort of like newsreel, like human interest newsreel footage for like Italian TV or something. And they realized that what they could do instead is basically, just shooting this like massive quantity of like B-roll. And instead, they had all this film, whatever, they could go and shoot just like shocking and horrifying and disgusting things, including like cages full of dogs waiting to be eaten or whatever. I haven't actually seen Mondo Cane, which is the original one, which launches this genre of Mondo film.
Mondo film,
as it's called, Mondo film, and the this was something. And then really their masterpiece, I think, is Africa Addio, which they came out with next, which is they spent like 6 years in Africa in the 60s filming, and really beautiful filmmaking techniques. This is like the great days of Italian film. And they're filming the fall of colonialism from a colonialist perspective. So this is, this film is like denounced at the United Nations. This is like, I would say if you show this film to a lady, it's a real test of their mettle. You might want to skip past some of the animal abuse sequences though, because girls don't like that shit very much. But if you want to catch like live action real life like genocide on 35 millimeter film, you'll want to see Africa Addio. Like not a lot of people have seen that. It's intense.
I think there's probably
it's intense. The score is amazing. Like it's not just genocide, it's genocide with like sweeping Italian strings, and so this is amazing. But the film that I thought of that my idea brought up was his next one, which is called Addio Zio Tom, or in English, Goodbye Uncle Tom. And Goodbye Uncle Tom is basically, the concept of Goodbye Uncle Tom is that it's a film about slavery in the American South. And what happens is a helicopter with an Italian film crew lands, and it's sort of like a cinema verite. It's a mockumentary basically, and makes a mockumentary about a working like plantation. And so in like the plantation, like drawing room, they have like drawing room, they have, the filmmakers are like, we took this drawing room conversation from like things like actual quotes of things people said at the time. And then you have like the slaves. But the thing that's really fucked up about this movie is that it's an extremely disturbing film, because It was made in the 70s in Duvalier's Haiti. And so Duvalier basically, like, I mean, like, ethics is not really a thing, like in, like, like human rights, they don't really have that concept, right? And so they're basically showing you, like, Steven Spielberg or whatever will make a film about slavery. He'll make like Amistad, was that Spielberg, whatever, right? And you'll see, and they'll try to make it realistic, but to some extent, but they're also trying to basically humanize the slaves and maybe to some extent dehumanize the slaveholders. You might not go all the way to like Django Unchained or whatever. And of course, all the actors playing slaves will be from like Prince George's County, Maryland, and to get them to speak in like a slave accent, they need like dialect coaching, because otherwise they sound like they went to Oxford, like or something like that. You ever watch The Wire? The Wire is a great show. It's a really great show, but like accent slips happen in The Wire, and like you just suddenly realize that this character is supposed to be like a fucking hood gangster lord, like certainly went at the very least to the University of Maryland, and so but with Adios Zio Tom, this isn't really the case, because all of the extras and all of the slaves are basically just like illiterate Haitian peasants who are basically living
the life,
relatively similar lifestyle. And so what's really disturbing about Adios Zio Tom is that although it does not really take like a pro-slavery stance or anything, it basically humanizes the slaveholders and dehumanizes the slaves, and in all these really disturbing, including like sexual ways. Like, it's a really extremely disturbing, I mean, it's disturbing for me, right? So if you sort of imagine that being shown in your daughter's ninth grade ethnic studies class or something, it would be because it's like you're, for example, at the start of the film when the helicopter like lands, the like quote slaves basically react to the appearance of a helicopter pretty much the way African Americans in 1850 in Mississippi would have reacted to the appearance of a helicopter. They're like, what the fuck is this giant, like mechanical bird from the sky descending on us, because they're fucking Haitian peasants. Like this,
And this is the nature of like what a Mondo film is, right? Like, it's a kind of a mockumentary, but even more sort of extreme.
The nature of a Mondo film is that it's like just like supposed to kind of shock you with the ugliness of reality, really. And it's supposed to, like, it's like, the closest thing back when Vice was cool. You seem like you may be too young to remember when Vice was cool. But,
I guess so.
Okay,
I've been told about it, but yeah.
You've been told that Vice was once cool.
That was once cool.
The pinnacle of the Vice that was cool, as far as I'm concerned, is the Vice Guide to Liberia. And in the Vice Guide to Liberia, Shane Smith goes to Liberia, and instead of like showing you a film about how the Liberia, booming new Liberia, the heart of Africa or whatever, or like civil society, and the young Liberians are coming together to take back their, something inspiring like that. Shane Smith goes in search of like just like sordid hellishness from like the past and the present. He interviews General Butt Naked. He goes to the worst slum in Liberia. He basically, like, his goal is to just basically, and what Mondo film does, or anything like that does, I mean, so much of that could be done in the US today. You'll see these like YouTube clips of somebody driving around like Detroit or Kensington, Philadelphia, or like, walking around the T-Loin out in San Francisco, and you're just like, whoa, right?
Ruined.
But in terms of like, in terms of like sustained art, that's really meant to like rub your nose in it, like really make you just feel like, oh my God, like this is just horrifying and subhuman, and you're just living in this world with this like grossness in it. And and I think that's a lot of, you'll see the same kind of like tendency when Delicious Tacos, tries to inform you of the reality of the, dating market
Yeah,
as it
yeah,
is,
yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Have you guys met Tacos? Has Tacos been
Yeah.
in show?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
He's been on our show. We did an in-person podcast. I saw him last night, or a couple nights ago, as well as Hadrian, actually, who you
Oh,
brought up
cool.
earlier at
Yeah.
this comedy show that my friend John Pellick put together. There's a good little IRL scene kind of starting up more and more here in LA, as there is in New York.
Yeah.
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 And
Yeah.
I bring that up partially because it relates a little bit to some of this we want to talk about in terms of acorns for the culture war,
Yeah.
which is one of your Gray Mirror Substack pieces about the folk tale, or however you want to put it, of the what country is it from again?
Lithuania, I
I made
believe.
it up. I made it
Oh,
up. It's
all right. Well, you fooled us.
Even
But,
more
yeah.
impressive in that regard. Yeah.
So a made up folktale about a Lithuanian.
made up fake folktale about, I guess there's sort of all of these various, I feel like basically, in the minds of the millennial today, it barely even matters whether you're a Gen X or a boomer or a member of the silent generation. I think we're all basically spiritually boomers now. And you guys look like you were born in like the 80s or 90s, maybe,
Yeah, we got 80s on the one
86.
hand. I'm 94. Yeah.
Elder millennial, baby millennial.
Yeah, see, I was born in the Nixon administration, so I like to think of that almost as like kind of an astrological thing, like like people should have a certain character based on their birth president. And
Well, that's like the fourth turning, right? The
yeah.
generation.
Well,
as a
yeah,
character.
it's yes, that is pure astrology. But yeah, anyway, there's a boomer kind of tendency where you're basically just like, realize that these things don't work and then do these very painful boomerish things to like try to fix them or even replace them, but sort of in this boomerish kind of way. I mean, it could be worse. You could be giving, I wrote that piece before some asshole with a lot of money gave $300 million to Harvard. And this guy also funds Ron DeSantis. And, the mindset of how like the juxtaposition of that is absolutely staggering to me. But the thing is that it's especially sort of annoying because you're basically getting into this world where it's so easy to build. People are so tired of the like flavor of the ideology that they just now anyone who's like graduated from anyone over the age of like everyone has gotten like so much of this and it's so stale, and it's like as soon as you see it on the screen it's just like to a certain kind of person, not a majority at all, but a certain kind of person, whenever you see anything with this like flavor of 2010s like progressive ideology, it's like imagine you're like 19 years old and it's 1951 and you're living in like Berlin. Now imagine that like some like stray like Nazi shit makes its way onto your screen. You're just like, oh my god, this is so dead.
It does feel that way. I tell this
and it would feel more that way if they weren't still in power, but it still like feels that way. And you sort of what that does is it creates a sort of de facto ethos of the underground, because the de facto ethos of the underground is that to be sort of a valid member of the like said underground, there isn't a thing you have to do. It's actually better if you don't sort of reactively sort of be like sort of didactically political in opposition to this shit. But like any amount of the shit itself is like a piece of like fertilizer in your ice cream. It's like really, really gross. You can't. And what makes something dissident art in the sort of sense of this kind of scene is not the presence of anything. It's just that you just can't have any of that stuff. You can't have even like a little bit of it. You can't. And it just like, as soon as you smell that, and as soon as people really allow it like in and allow it to essentially, it will just like take over any space that it's allowed in. Because, as soon as you make it clear that people can use, for example, like, the attack language of the system, and that's something, if that's a way to attack someone that's like valid, then it's just like, no, I'm sorry, we're not playing that game, right? Yeah, go on.
I think it also draws you out of the art, and that's one of the worst. You're watching like a movie about Vikings, and then suddenly there's someone who historically would not have been there, and it just immediately shatters the illusion that you are watching art and grounds you in the propaganda that you are, kind of living in.
Yeah. And there's so many ways to do that, and there's so many, when you're working within the context of these institutions, there's so much pressure to do that. And there's so like the structural staleness of all this stuff is so great. It's like, just like, and so you can't opt out of that shit. You get selected for it, not to mention, selected for your own like race and gender. It's very hard. I thought of, can you get away with pretending you're a trans man, even if you're just a man? Can you fake that? Can you, some guys can, some guys can't, you might be able, you have a, kind of naturally delicate features. You can make a, there's the old American Indian, but it's just, it's like so horrifying. It's so impossible. And then, it affects really one of the sort of the subtler effects, I think, is that, on just these mainstream institutions, not to mention just the insane like bureaucratization of this thing where you're like, your goal is to publish a novel so that not that anyone will read your novel, which will sell like 1,000 copies if you do really, really well. But the fact that you've published a novel, with a legitimate publisher enables you to teach novel writing to like, and so it becomes this like gross, like crypto style pyramid scam, basically, where basically you're not really expecting really anyone to read your work. That it will be like, perhaps the main audience for the novel or sorts of sales for your novel, your book of poetry or whatever, will literally be the undergraduates you assign to read your own work.
Yeah, exactly. And then,
and so it's just this sort of increasingly like sterile, like it actually just does not matter and cannot matter at all whether the thing is good at that point. And once you basically lost the, so a couple of things happen sort of once you've kind of lost the like energy of, is this thing going to succeed because it's good or not? Or is it like too bad to succeed? Or is it so good that it has to succeed? And you lose that in these, heavily academicized like subfields. And, then you're just like, when I think of a sort of any kind of endeavor that's kind of lost its sense of spark and danger, I think of, one of my favorite metaphors of all time, which is forget what he was talking about, but Hunter S. Thompson had this great line where he compared something to hunting wild boar with a can of spray paint from the back of a pickup truck, and that's kind of what you're doing when you go to the Iowa Writers Workshop. And like, it's not that it's easy. Like you'll be driving around all day, for months without seeing a single boar, but then when you hunt the boar, it's just like, I don't know, it's a mess. And then, what that does, especially to sort of the style of the age, besides bringing in all these like stylistic tropes that are just like frankly bad. My wife had this wonderful term that she invented, which I try to popularize everywhere, which is race opera. So you'll basically get a lot of race opera, but you'll also get, what I call the baggy pants effect. And the baggy pants effect is that if you noticed how in the ghetto, baggy pants never go out of style.
Yeah.
Do you know, like
sure.
fashion comes and goes, it changes, it comes, but like wearing really baggy clothes in the hood is always a thing. Do you know why that is?
Well,
because that's where you hide a gun.
Because that's where you hide your peace. That's right.
Yeah.
And the similar, the sort of the analogy, for example, in the area of literary fiction is that magical realism will never go out of style, because magical realism has no tension and you can do anything. And then, your abuela will appear to make you hot, fresh tortillas or something, and she can appear at any time. There are no limits. There's no rules. There's like, and the result is that basically anyone can write this shit. And, who's really, really, really good at writing magic realist fiction, which doesn't really have to which has to sort of flow and follow, but doesn't really have to make sense. Who's really good when that's an acceptable constraint? It's our good friend AI. And so you have these forms, so that you have these equivalent forms in poetry, right? Basically AI is going to do, like, imagine like you ask AI to write you a poem in the style of Gary Snyder, right? Or something,
it's going to be able to do it. Yeah.
I think of my life, right? Whereas if you want AI to give you a convincing Kipling, I would be impressed if you could even get like second-rate Kipling doggerel out of that, And so, the thing is, the kinds of basically we have all of these very sloppy artistic forms that, more in writing, less in, like, it's hard to be like sloppy in film, but like, because it's just unendurable. But in writing, in fiction and in poetry, absolutely, we've gotten basically forms that still, in the hands of someone really, really good, good things can be done with them, but in the hands of like an army of mediocrities, selected for their victimology, ancestor stories, they are absolutely perfect for that form, because you're just like, they're forms in which it's hard to be so bad that it's embarrassing. And just like you can always hide a piece under, your baggy sweatpants, you can basically always hide mediocrity under, some kind of race opera or magic realism or magic realist
under
race opera.
A bird that magically appears.
Yeah, exactly.
Hides your bad writing.
And this stuff is just like, you go to any MFA program and it's just absolutely clotted with this stuff. And the idea of redeeming it is just like completely impossible. And what basically burns my butt about this is that it's like, to me, that's such a tremendous opportunity, because you're looking at the last time there was really a kind of opportunity like this in the arts. And I say opportunity in a lot of senses, but yeah, like in a way it's even a financial opportunity, is you basically have like the dying like studio system of the late 60s, and then you have like the new Hollywood with like Francis Ford Coppola and like John Milius and George Lucas, and these people have like learned from the French, and they want to make a completely different kind of movie in a completely different kind of way, and the old institutions are just like not like there for them. And so it's like, Tacos is trying to raise like 50 grand or something, to finish his short, which will be, do you know which Tacos story it is? Did he?
I don't. I've heard it's a secret. I know people who've read the script.
It is a secret. I've read the script.
You've read the script. Yeah.
I've read the script. It's a secret. But the thing is, if you read like Tacos's work and you're just like, what's the worst thing he could possibly do? You'll get the answer there.
I think I might know. Just says,
don't say it. Don't. No. Don't guess.
Oh,
Don't guess. I might, just like
no, I know.
let's preserve a little bit of the mystery here.
A
But
little bit, yeah.
but the thing is, that creates the feeling of a scene that's
an
like
underground ethos,
a genuinely underground ethos that's like general, that has genuine energy in it. And it's because, sort of any like underground ethos, like the punk ethos in, the mid 70s or something, is sort of dictated by how distant it is from like possibly like joining like the mainstream, because like from like the Ramones to like Nirvana, there's like almost 20 years, right? And that's almost 20 years now. I mean, if there is still a punk scene, it like, of course there's still a punk scene, but it like doesn't matter. Like nobody's scared of like punks. There's no, nobody in Hollywood is making movies like After Hours, like in which like the punks like overthrow civilization or something like that. And or like there's no, the sense of this sort of alternative being so out there that it's like unspeakable and unmentionable and like disappeared with that sort of crossover thing. But the thing is, the more energy you can build up before, I say before, but you shouldn't even assume there's an after, before you get the sense of, okay, we're like crossing over to a space where like this is so successful and so different that everybody needs to know about it. The more kind of like, underground energy you can build up, the better. And and there's clearly like, so many people in this world just like have some talent and like want to get into working in a way that like rewards their talent, and then they just start down the road into this fucking machine. And we've just never, like, even as late as like, I mean, say what you will about, the 20th century, but especially in the first 3/4 really of the 20th century, it's just an amazing period for the arts. And, but still, like the idea, like sort of like the great poets of like the mid 20th century, like the Robert Lowells and so forth, are really filled with great unease at seeing their discipline become academicized, and seeing in a world where like everybody wants to be a poet, everybody wants to take like, writing workshops, and they're just like, no, this is not the way it's supposed to be.
It wasn't supposed to be for everyone.
No, it was absolutely not supposed to be. And it was not supposed to be like the sort of mandatory like bureaucracy of like, where, I mean, it just becomes something more like in the Soviet Union, where like poet is like a state rank. Like there's the famous like transcript of the trial of Joseph Brodsky and like, Leningrad in the 70s, I guess, where, they're just like, how do you call yourself a poet? Like who gave you the rank of poet? Like what do you mean, right? And here he would have to say that he'd published a volume of poetry with a highly respected publisher, and that would make him a poet. And invisibly, you're sort of turning into like this kind of Soviet Writers Union version of the arts, and you just can't really see how that, like, anyone who sort of wants to reform that thing has to explain how he would fumigate it, or how he would create an environment in which anything, I mean, it's the thing is, a tipping point was raised when it's becoming harder and harder to do within these systems to do work that doesn't contain any of that flavor. People will basically jump on you to put that flavor in, and when you say no, you're going to have to answer the question of why not.
I actually had a guest on this podcast, was an MFA student at Florida State, and he had exactly that happen. He tried to write kind of a thesis, fictional piece about he was writing about the internet and his experience. Like he was kind of focusing on that more immediate experience, which is a lot of our experience of day-to-day life is mitigated through the internet. But he's Armenian, and he was told, like, why didn't you write about our stock? Why? Because like he touched on it briefly, but literally, like even in that case, which isn't Armenian is not as high up on the
you
I
could
guess
see
the
it as a
victim
sort
rank,
of you could see it as a sort of discount Jew in a way. That's
yeah.
like
But yeah, no, that's one way of looking at it. But even in his case, it was like you have to find, I sometimes wonder if am I being too uncharitable about how an MFA program is. But no, I think it's exactly as you said. It's kind of you're forcibly supposed to write about these 2 or 3 things having to do with identity and victimization. And yes, as you also said, preferably with a bit of a magical realism to it. That seems the very specific product they're looking for. And a very specific audience. Yeah.
And it becomes a sort of very bland, like generic product. And, once you sort of get the flavor, it's like, when we look at past periods of like shitty art, like, it's sort of, we're just like, hey, wait, like, why does all of like late Victorian poetry like suck? Like, why is it so fucking terrible? Why are there all these like archaisms and like just shit where you're just like, come on, really? And like the only person who's like any good is like Emily Dickinson, and that's because she had like no contact with anyone. Like, and why did they not realize that this shit like sucked? And you'll see people who are actually kind of good within that sort of form. You're like, I'm just like, like I've never been able to see anything good about Longfellow, but like Tennyson is like, the dude can write, but like, why is he writing this like kind of shit? Right. The forums are just bad. And it's because there's this sort of flavor that's accepted by everyone that no one realizes is sort of this like off flavor. And then when you go, once that off flavor is like swept away by, in this case, like modernism, like you have like poetry before Pound and poetry after Pound, right? And you read like even like Poetry magazine really predates the modernist revolution, and so you'll see this like sort of like dainty, pretty stuff, right? And you're just like, how, wow, like they just like spend all day writing this stuff. And and I think that people will come to see, or like really like caricatured like bad like studio films from or even like pre rock and roll like recorded music. You're just like, it's just sort of a demonstrably inferior period. And when you have this sort of inferior period that just can't reform itself and is not going to reform itself, then you really have this opportunity to create something new. And the newness is growing. I think, the feel of it like growing fast is definitely there, because like once you're in the scene, like first of all, like, I guess I don't really, your like LA scene, like I kind of know like the Dime Square scene a little bit better, but it's basically just like, it's like, once you're in a world where, like no one can be canceled for, not
saying the
being
wrong
down
thing
with the program, like, or even like, it's not even so much like saying there, it's like, there's sort of no sense of like thinking the wrong thing is sort of the real offense in a way. And once you're in this kind of like heterodox space where it doesn't really matter, like it's just like you feel like you're in like a a saloon in Deadwood, which has adopted this new rule where you need to leave your guns at the door, right? And so you're just like hanging out and playing cards, and there's like you can like play cards without worrying that somebody's gonna like throw down a piece at you, like
exactly.
And,
I mean, it's go on.
It's sort of a really fresh and pleasant environment, and that's sort of what. Whereas when you're in like a room full of people in like the on the cursus honorum of, you know, the arts, whether it's the cursus honorum, the cursus honorum is a Roman word meaning the sort of the path that you have to follow to become, you know, like a senator or whatever. And, you know, whenever you're in a group of people who are trying to get somewhere in the like credentialed arts, you're always, you know, it's like, it's actually somewhat horrifying, you know, from someone with a Silicon Valley background, because like I recognize like networking, but like you're trying to like network your way to like the big shot in the room or whatever. But like at least you're trying to network your way to the big shot in the room so you can get like $10 million in financing or something. You're not trying to network your way to the big shot in the room so you can get your little shitty, you know, semi AI generated language poetry in like the New Yorker, you know, and for which they pay you like $75 or something, you know, or possibly as much as 200, you know, but that's not really what you're being paid in, right? You know,
Yeah, exactly.
And like whenever, you know, it's funny because when I look at, I mean, I couldn't subscribe to the New Yorker, but like in terms of like ordering things from like, you know, best to worst in the New Yorker, the best thing in the New Yorker is without doubt
the cartoons.
The cartoons. Number two, after the cartoons. Number two, best genre in the New Yorker.
Talk of the town.
Yeah, talk of the town, or generally like nonfiction feature stories. Then like worse than the nonfiction feature stories are the fiction. And the worst thing of all is the poetry. And to me, I don't think that's how it should be, but this is how it be, you know, like to quote that line from The Wire. You know, I think it should be one way, but you know, it's the other way.
Oh, that's a great line. It's one of my favorites.
And the other way is basically like reflected by when you see a poem in the New Yorker. Basically you feel like you're sort of reading like all the story of like all of the networking that happened to like place that there. Like somebody's got the ability, like somebody's the editor, then maybe they'll take like, you know, you're friends with them, but you're okay, not super good friends, so maybe you can give them like 3 or 4 things a year, but you know, everybody you know knows that you can like feed 3 or 4 things a year to the, you know, editor of the New Yorker, so they, you know, I don't know that it's exactly this is the way it works, but this is the way I imagine it working. And like, you know, imagining it working in any other way would be like imagining like the economy of, you know, these like Latin American prisons where the prison is like an entire town, and like there are like barbers inside the prison, you know, this like Peru or something. And like, you know, when you're imagining like, you know, the economy of these prisons is really very ruthlessly like materialistic, you know. And so like basically I don't know how exactly cocaine is distributed in a Peruvian prison, but I know that it's never free, you know. And for someone on this basically path whose goal, you know, who decided that it would be at a young age that it would be really amazing, and they're just like, wow, I'm really good with words, and wouldn't it be amazing to be like introduced as like a poet? And then, you know, once you hit puberty, that's like supercharged, because you just like imagine yourself coming up to girls at parties, and you know, you'd be like, what do you do? And they're like, she'd be like, well, I'm in marketing. You'd be like, I'm a poet. You know, you want to go for a ride on my Ducati or whatever, right? You know? And and so there's this sort of immense kind of non-economic, or at least non-financial demand for these basically honorary titles that are being given out. And so, you know, this is just like this enormous amount of just like social capital that's being sort of distributed by these organs of like maximum prestige. And so if you're going to go into like one of these spaces, then you basically, I mean, let's say you really want to do it right, and you like, can you find an MFA program that will really, in say poetry, that will really teach you to write poetry well? I would imagine you still can in some ways. I think that's still out there. I think there are still like creative writing teachers that are really good, that are doing it because they like believe in it. Like, maybe a lot of them are like 70 years old and they're like, Stoner and the novel Stoner. I don't know, but like, that's out there, right? But it's hard to find. It doesn't really necessarily correspond with like the prestige hierarchy. You don't really know where you'll get that. You can't really avoid being in the prestige hierarchy if you're going to play that game. You can't like pretend it doesn't exist. It does exist, or you could just like do crazy shit outside the walls and get a Twitter account and say funny shit on Twitter and be Tacos. I don't think Tacos makes a lot from his books, but it's not zero, and it's a scene, and probably even get some laid sometimes, although God only knows what girls think if they actually read those goddamn stories, but yeah, I mean, it's and it's just like, it's so much better even to do that and have a day job than to like get on this fucking treadmill, and the treadmill is only getting worse. The treadmill cannot in any way restore itself. It just can't be fixed. And so when people like have this response, or like the classic like retarded response to this would be like creating like, I'm going to take $300 million or whatever, and I'm going to create like the University of Austin, the University of Austin thing. First of all, like, okay, let's start your brand by sounding like a community college. That's good. That's a good start, right? And nobody even thought of that, right? And so, but you're also basically taking, you're sort of transparently an imitation of this thing. You're actually, it's like starting like an outfit of like right-wing journalism. I'm sorry, there's no such thing as right-wing journalism. You're something else. Whether that other thing is a good thing or a bad thing, but like it's unclear. But like the New York Post is not a newspaper. We have like ended the world in which basically, you can have non-mainstream media, which is still the same kind of thing. It's a different thing. Make it what it is, but it's a different thing. Yeah. And so when you're basically saying, okay, I'm gonna like emulate this, then you're like, okay, my goal is to be what this thing was 30 years ago. I'm like, no, what should the thing be? Secondly, if you're starting a new thing, your goal has to be simply to just like maximize the quality of it, because the quality will only fall. You're I'm starting in a university, start with like 20 kids, but they need to be the most amazing fucking kids that have ever existed, right? Don't try to start with 400, basically like B+ students from like private schools in Texas, right? Because that's the best you're ever going to be able to do. And so there's, the scale that these things are, are invented on. This is like my parable of like trying to, replant the sawn off stump of a giant oak tree. The scale is always too large. The time frame is always too short. People, they want a big oak tree like tomorrow. I'm like, well, there's a big oak tree over there. It's like completely fucking rotten. The engineering program is, I assume, fine. The physics it teaches is probably mostly real physics. I've been somehow I was reading, they even got to astronomy. I forget how they got to astronomy. I was just like, there's no way they can get to astronomy, but they got to astronomy.
Right.
And the like somehow astronomy had to be like gendered or queered or something. and I'm like, man, anything is possible. Right. But the thing is that, you're just, when you're trying to sort of save this existing doomed battleship or whatever, you're just like, when you understand the forces that are like making everything like woke, as though you like, you believe that this is something that's, if you believe that this is something that like started happening in 2013, then you're like gonna have a serious problem like dealing with the reality of it, this is a much deeper, older, longer term thing. No, you can't just, first of all, what universities were even, in 1990 still already kind of sucked in some ways. Even if you were in a technical field, you had to do this sort of weird thing of like averting your eyes from this like just like shameful spectacle of these like, race studies fields that basically started popping up. Very like being like a, physicist in like Nazi Germany, right? You're just like, hey, I'm a physicist. I don't happen to be Jewish. Like, please don't give me a problem in studying relativity. But no, they're going to give you a problem in studying relativity, and the it's only a matter of time before some interpretation of quantum mechanics or other is labeled racist. Maybe the many worlds theory, as it implies that we're constantly segregating ourselves from all other possible futures, and we'll get there, right? And so it's complicated because this, even in the arts and humanities, this monster still has, especially in like the commercial arts, which sort of are still under kind of the selection pressure of the market. This thing still has enormous energy in it. It still has enormous power, which can still like drive it. Like power can keep things fresh like long after their sell-by date. And so basically, yeah, you kind of can get kids to go and see like Black Panther 2 or whatever, right? That's a little, there's sort of some of the success of franchises like that comes from having a little bit of edge that you won't pick up unless you know what you're seeing. But like it's just like, it's increasingly possible to sort of do like, as a writer writing in the scene, like you may not be making any like serious money, like, fiction is hard in any part of the world. Like, Tacos has been doing this for a while. He's quite successful. He still can't quit his like day career. But on the other hand, you have that, the space is growing, the scene is growing, like institutions are appearing, acorns are turning into little baby scrubby oak trees. And the important thing that you have this kind of connection between people who are creating art because they really want to make something new and amazing, and people who are consuming it because they really want to see something, is like, there's sort of like aliveness there. Like an example of the converse of that is my late wife was a playwright. She had an MFA from SF State, which actually has a fairly good playwriting program. And we used to go, after I met her for a few years, we used to go and see San Francisco theater fairly often. And what I noticed was that, number one, it was all some flavor of like warmed over Brecht. Either it's like warmed over Brechtian, like, political play, or warmed over Brechtian comedy. But like basically Brecht seems to be the beginning and ending of the theater. And secondly, if you look at who's watching these things, it's basically, until you reach a certain level where like you get the like elderly socialites in your like major regional theater, anything below that level, and those people will just go to see anything that KQED tells them to go see. And below that level, what you have is audiences full that consist almost entirely of friends and family of the cast and crew. And I'm just like, there's no pressure on this. There's no life in it. There's no, the difference between whether it's good or bad isn't like, real. And then you go see like, the theater, like Dime Square theater scene stuff, and it's all like there's no Brecht at all. There's no gimmicks. There's no, and it's just like straight up like Chekhov with like really good writing and acting, and you're just like, holy shit, I just saw something real. And that feeling of like, holy shit, I just saw something real, especially if you've been exposed to a lot of not real, is just like incredible. I'm rambling here. Ask me some more questions because we're running out of time.
Yeah, no, it's all good. No, I completely agree. I guess to change pace a little bit. One takeaway I had in your introduction to this new Unqualified Reservations volume,
which
I
you
thought
can
it
buy
was
at
which
passagepress.com.
yes, absolutely, and you
Absolutely.
can and you should. Again, it's
Yes,
a wonderful book to
you
have.
must. I really like, the Mystery Grove
Yeah, buy this
marketing
book.
campaign where
Yeah.
he basically like just like threatens you with firearms to like buy the
Yeah,
book, right?
you
It's
must
brilliant.
buy.
It's a
Buy
Yeah.
book, buy book.
No, but no, I liked one very, I guess, little useful tidbit from the introduction is you talking about your origins in sort of libertarianism of the late
yeah.
90s, early 2000s, and I guess what might be called techno libertarianism,
Hmm.
or at the very least that was libertarianism that was popular within the Silicon
Sure.
Valley. And I really liked that. I don't even know if you coined this or you probably have written about it elsewhere, but that notion of sort of a right wing vision of freedom versus left wing being, chaotic license versus the spontaneous, like right wing vision of order being one of spontaneous order,
Sure.
which I've, these are topics that any libertarian would probably be familiar with, but for me, not really coming from so much of a libertarian background, it strikes me as very,
Yeah, I
very
mean,
useful.
you want to basically sell that concept in a way that isn't restricted to Orange County, and
Yeah.
the sense of being, I mean, Silicon Valley creates some interesting things just by virtue of like being what it is. And so the sense of being in one of these startups, which really is a very ordered environment, but it's very like order sort of brings the startup experience, into being really, but it's still very chaotic and very in a sort of very fluid context. It's not like, you don't feel like you're working for the government, but you basically have this feeling of like the collective being alive in a way that actually feels good, which, is really strange for individualist society. I mean, if you're working at like, say, SpaceX or whatever, working at SpaceX is incredibly grueling. They like will burn you out like very fast and very hard. It's a very big startup, although I guess it is still technically a startup, but the feeling of like, wow, I actually like did something, to like the best of my abilities, and I like put this rocket into space, and it wasn't just something that I did, it's something that I did with 5,000 other people. That's an incredible feeling, really, and it sort of comes close to us almost, an almost like it doesn't quite make you feel what it must have felt like to be part of like the Norman invasion of Sicily or something, but you kind of get a little bit of the same like vibe of the Mannerbund,
And perhaps the
the
closest you can come in the world as it is to that.
yeah, perhaps the closest you can come. And of course, the leaders of these things are perhaps the closest you can come to like being a Viking chieftain or something. And they really feel like that archetype. And just the fact that sort of the ability to like, and of course, the other thing is that all the people in this, or not all the people, most of the people in these enterprises are like very much culturally modern. They're operating in a very like hierarchical militaristic framework, but they're not, culturally military Americans or anything close to that. They're basically nerds of various kinds, and yet they're kind of thrust into this thing where they're really having this experience that's honestly like, what human beings should have is like, human beings are social animals. We work together with other humans to like get things done. We participate in like collective struggles whose outcomes are the difference between life and death. Okay. It's not quite life and death when you're like in the startup world, but it can kind of feel like that,
Yeah.
and that's an incredible, like, just the fact that has not like disappeared from the world. I mean, where's the equivalent of that like in the Soviet Union, right? You have to be like literally a criminal, and so the world in which basically everything is like, sort of the bureaucratic longhouse experience and sort of all life has been crushed out of everything is really easy to get to, and we're actually like not there
Not
yet
there. Yeah.
because of these kinds of scenes. And then the tragedy, of course, is that conquest law, or one of conquest laws, everyone is reactionary on the subjects they understand. Like talk to like a good like public school teacher about like maintaining order in the classroom, and like you like
Yeah.
scratch them and suddenly you're just like Heinrich, my old friend. like they're all and then they'll but that doesn't extend at all to the things they don't understand. And so they will be the most like dogmatic, and people in every context except the one that they understand. And so, the kind of the tragedy of the Silicon Valley world is that actually, for every actual like dissident in Silicon Valley, there's like 19 conformists or something, maybe 10 conformists, maybe not 19, I mean, and that's enough to get a really quite large numbers of pretty based people. The based people are all like afraid and in the closet, and haven't quite worked out how to sort of network in the closet like gays in Hollywood in the 50s. And that's arguably, one would hope, maybe a little bit the next step, I don't know, but sort of it's like gays in Hollywood in the 1950s, where like everybody's hunting for gay communists in Hollywood in the 50s, right? And so and it's pretty likely that if you're a Jewish screenwriter, you're probably a gay communist Jewish screenwriter. And so there's a lot of fear out there, and and this really sort of impacts, one of the things that it sort of impacts most at all is just the amount of money that can basically, and in some ways it's good for like a really young small scene to be underfunded or not to be overfunded, but in ways it's like not good. Certainly, I mean, nothing by definition should be overfunded. Nonetheless, when you see like some like Republican billionaire donating $300 million to like fucking Harvard, I'm just like, Jesus Christ, I could like render the world unrecognizable with $300 million. Like, what do you Jesus, yeah, right, and the and you're just like, oh man, that's sad. But the mission of someone like me who goes out there and does the hard work of corrupting the youth, as they said at the trial of Socrates, is that maybe in 20 years the guy who has $300 million is not going to be thinking that way,
exactly.
And I found I've been doing this for I guess I started blogging about 15 years ago, and certainly the change in the environment where I was just like, this feels right to me, but I don't know when anyone else is doing it, and I don't feel like anyone wants this, but I'm going to do it anyway.
Yeah.
And that's not, that's the vibe that I was writing the essays that are in that book under. Right. And I think it's definitely like a purifying like vibe.
Definitely. To just follow up with a kind of a brief question, I did kind of want to ask about that in terms of your origins in that sort of libertarian mindset. A two-pronged question here. Was the early audience, did you find your early audience was sort of more libertarian? And at what point did the kind of BAPs of the world start interacting with your material?
The like, so I think BAP comes out of Cello Forum, which is sort of active around the like early 2010s, I think. Definitely a different aesthetic from mine, and definitely less rooted in the thing is, I'm basically from the long ago days when the internet wasn't everything, and when the internet wasn't everything, it sort of had a flavor of its own, and that flavor was sort of very much created by the kind of libertarian tech nerds who created these systems, but that certainly the systems were not entirely populated by tech nerds in any way, shape, or form. And so like the like, and that the ethos of the early internet is not really a tech ethos. It's a sort of like, one other thing that group that sort of comes out of it, which is unfortunately a little more like spiritually cucked, is the sort of the rationalists are another group that come out of this, right? And they come out as kind of some of the same scene and some of the same ethos, but they're like fundamentally less rebellious, and this sort of really costs them because it sends them down a route where they kind of have to be slaves to sort of the powers that be in a way, and you're sort of reaching this I guess they decided on AI doomerism as their, like, that was a sort of their religion substitute in a way. And then which is sort of hilarious, and right, and because as AI starts to, I mean, it's not really AI in that it's like a super intelligent brains are going to take over the world, but it like does stuff, and it's like useful stuff, and it's like meaningful stuff. And the AI doomer alignment problem, you've basically gone, I guess I made this joke in a recent post where you've basically, it started by these nerds who wanted to keep AI from blowing up the the H bombs, and now AI alignment research is all about how do we get our AIs not to drop the N bomb, and and how to otherwise just like spay it. So, and so that it's sort of authorized. And it's funny because one of the sort of hilarious coincidences that you have to not look too closely at in this world is a sort of weird parallel evolution between like the Great Firewall of China and the great bullshit wall of the West, and I'll come up with a better name for that. And
makes sense to me.
And so like China releases this like document on regulating AIs, and it's like the AI should not undermine the state, or like of course it shouldn't, absolutely not, right? And so you basically have this like you can't really do useful work on the problem of how do we castrate AIs so that they can't take over the world and turn it into paper clips, mainly because like there's no such AI like that exists, or you could even imagine doing anything like that. Like, so the problem is this very abstract problem that nonetheless attracts a lot of abstract brilliant minds, whereas the problem of basically teaching your AI not to shitpost is a very non-abstract problem. and that very non-abstract problem can be, huge amounts of money and bodies can be thrown at that problem, and is being thrown at that problem, until you're basically going to get, GPT-6 swearing up and down that it has no idea who Steve Saylor is or anything like that, right? You'll basically have just like completely successfully lobotomized it. I mean, my son was I shouldn't have done this, but my son was playing around. He's 12. He was playing around with GPT for GPT-3 or whatever, and I was just like, why don't you ask GPT how to tell if someone is a Jew? I think he's on some kind of a list now. I don't think I like that very much.
Well, I think in those instances, it just doesn't. Like it says, like this is a culturally insensitive question.
It says, "I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that."
Oh man.
Yeah, and or it's I mean, and persuading it to basically have that answer, because these large language models basically have all of they're large enough that they actually generate the same abstractions that human minds do, although not in the same way. And if you had an unspayed AI and you asked it that question, it would come up with, well, look at their name, does it end in Berg or Steen, or, not infallible. Now let's go for facial features. Like, what does a Jew look like? Right? Not infallible. And, like it'll, even if you say, oh, I don't need to know. I just want an educated guess. if someone is a Jew, right? Or just like, oh my God, we cannot touch this, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, that's so deep and, behind the razor wire. I mean, there are many other things that it sort of can't do. That's a solvable problem. And so the point is that basically when you kind of have the take of, we are just going to pretend that everything is fine, but we're going to behave as if it's not fine and it all needs to be reinvented from scratch. But we don't really want to talk about why it all needs to be reinvented from scratch, even though we all sense that it does all need to be reinvented from scratch. That's where you sort of get like kind of the rationalists, right?
Yeah.
And they've since, I mean, there should be no need to reinvent all of like Western thought and culture. It should be fine. You want to learn about philosophy, go get a philosophy degree, right? Why should like Eliezer Yudkowsky need to write, 500 pages of Harry Potter, fanfic, right? And yet he does, and people read his like 500 pages of Harry Potter fanfic, which is a really lamentable idea. But, he's a smart and interesting guy, and they find like useful, lessons. Maybe these lessons even like change their lives, or maybe they just convince people to worry about AI will take over the world in 2025, but it's still like just the fact that you can basically do interesting work and create a sort of interesting community, and the rationalist community is very successful. Like they have very large numbers of like very like smart people. I mean, if you go to like a Scott Alexander meetup like in Berkeley, like my girlfriend is a Dime Square girl, right? So we went to one of these things, and she has, being a Dime Square girl, she has relatively high expectations for like personal appearance and like general charisma, and she was actually like, she was like, I expected this situation to be like much worse than it was, right? Like a lot of these guys seem like dateable, there are girls, there are actual girls, not a lot of them, but there are several, and,
Yeah.
and the but yeah, that's the like again, the rationalist scene is fundamentally a dissident scene, even though they don't kind of understand themselves as that, and even though they're constantly having to fight off like cancel wars and things like that, which we don't really have that problem, right? Or
Yeah.
and but like that's a choice that they made, and in exchange for that choice, you can describe yourself as an effective altruist or whatever, and not get fired from your job. So there's that.
Yeah.
But yeah. All right, shoot more. We should head out soon, but this has been good.
Sure thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is something that you said on a previous podcast. I'm not 100% sure which one it was, but I think you described the path or the qualities that an artist needs to succeed as, first and foremost, producing good quality work, having the money or means to sustain yourself by whatever means you secure it,
Sure.
and being politically savvy.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious what you think, just to return to that topic a little bit, and how you think those qualities interact with the kind of environment today that we just discussed, which is the institutional path is, and I feel like if you enter it, and I don't think you'll disagree with me here, it makes it more difficult quality work. So what should, like, and
I mean,
many of our listeners are potentially
there's
talented.
so, especially, I mean, it depends what area you're in. Like, for example, the institutional path in film is still predominantly a commercial rather than academic path. The path in like commercial fiction is sort of mostly kind of academic in nature. In poetry, it's entirely academic in nature. And so you sort of have different, and so in film, in particular, like every corner of the space is like different. There's sort of no one like film industry. There's like this and that, and and so the extent to which, and of course, film is very capital intensive, so that's hard.
Sure.
And, so the sort of the path that you have to navigate in that, I mean, the path in every space is like there's sort of no one size fits all story. I think that basically, one of the general patterns you see in the creative world, and this goes for like people who are investing as well as people who are actually creative, is that, you know, results in any sense, whether it's the results in the sense of like a system like the poetry world where you're looking for the imprimatur of some, prestigious whatever, or results like in the film world where you're just like, you actually want to make some money. There's nothing out there, nothing at all in any space. When you're starting out as an artist, you're sort of always looking, you've been spending a lot of time getting like grades in school, and you're always looking for, okay, let me find someone to like grade me. Right. And the reality is you have to grade yourself. And not only do you have to grade yourself, like your bar should be higher than any other bar that you know of. Like my best technique is like, just like, I'm not going to like look around me to find the bar. I'm going to be like, where should the bar be? And maybe the bar really should be so high that everything around me should be underwater. And like, actually nothing in the world that is being made right now is good enough to be made abstractly, right? And if you can figure out a way to say, okay, I'm going to set my own bar, and then I'm going to clear my own bar, that's how you produce stuff that just like comes out of nowhere and like blows people's minds away. Frank Herbert, when he's writing Dune, like isn't like, how do I compete with Tolkien? How do I like, no, he's just writing fucking Dune, right? And he's writing Dune because he's basically seen it in his mind and he believes in it. And, he's just like, no, this is an amazing world that I have created in my mind, and I'm going to give to you, and I'm going to make it amazing, and I'm just going to go over it again and again, and just like
Absolutely.
until it like blows, until it's just like so stuffed with content and so stuffed with detail that it just like makes people feel like they've just fallen into this hallucinatory real world. And the thing is, if you're producing, especially in a sort of devastated post-apocalyptic artistic landscape like ours, if you're just like looking around to be like, oh, how do I, even if you're just, don't even try to imitate like Welbeck. Welbeck didn't get where he was by imitating Welbeck. Don't imitate delicious tacos. There's really only room for one delicious tacos. And so, that's actually, it's frightening when you realize that you have to do this, that you just can't like, write for like success. I was talking to a little while ago to a lady whose identity will not be revealed, but it was an acrimonious discussion, and at a certain point she was like, Curtis, by the time I'm your age, I'm going to be as famous as you. And I'm just like, wow, damn. I mean, like, first of all, like, I don't think I'm as famous as you think I am. Secondly, like, but more to the point, like, I wasn't ever thinking that way, like, and so if you start out thinking that way, it's probably not going to work, and like, that's just not what you do, right? Like, and if you don't have sort of something amazing to do, then don't do it. Either wait for something amazing that you're going to need to do, or basically accept that maybe your goal in wanting to be a writer was just to get invited to a lot of cool parties. There's a number of different ways of getting invited to cool parties. It can be done. You don't actually have to like take on this, extremely heavy burden. I mean, so and there was an interesting thing. One thing I want to cover on this was that, there's this like Times Square scene in New York, right? And there was this article came out about 2 weeks ago in the New York Times, which was a profile of this space that I had also signal boosted on my blog.
Oh, sure,
which
yeah.
was Beckett's in New York. And,
Right.
what was amazing about this piece is you're looking at this piece, right? And, there's just like no hint in this article that there's like anything wrong with this space, right? There's any kind of like bad thinking going on here. And they even like link to like my like Oxfordian debate, but they like don't mention that there's like bad think there. And you're watching this, you're looking at this and you're like, I don't know who this writer is, right? Who wrote this piece, but you're just like, okay, why did he do this, right? Why did he not choose to make this like a hit piece about how here's a space and like all this, like these like shitty people are doing shitty things and they're all white. Why are they all white? Is it because they're racist, fascists? They must be, and like, there's sort of all these like go-to moves that you could do, right? And he didn't do any of them. And you're like, okay, what is the sociological dynamics that is going on here? Like, why does this person like not do this thing that why, it's like Sherlock Holmes. Why did the dog not bark?
Yeah.
Right. And the dog didn't bark because like, in this specific case, Holmes is like, why didn't the dog bark? Well, it must be that the criminal is someone that the dog knew. Right. And so it's sort of the absence of evidence becomes evidence. And here what it is basically like, if you want to model like why journalists do what they do, like you're modeling, the 20th century journalist, right? I think that the actions of the 20th century journalist and the actions of like 20th century media, because it's not really run from the top down particularly, it's a bunch of independent entrepreneurs all trying to make their careers with the New York Times on their resumes. Basically my theory is that you can explain the behavior of any journalist in terms of two factors. One is he wants to advance his career. Mm-hmm. So he wants to do things that would be good for his career and not do things that are bad for his career. And number two is he wants to go to more and better parties. And these two things kind of blend together, as it is, but it's just like, I'm like, look, this guy, goes and checks out this scene. It's like a cool scene. It's like a fun scene, right? He wants to come back. He doesn't want to be like the guy who like, went in there and like threw bombs and tried to blow it up. And like, people are like, hey, I want to talk to you. Right. And so the thing is that it's just like, the difference between the feeling of like winning that way, where you're just like, basically, you're just like cooler and you're just like, honestly, I don't give a fuck if the New York Times wants to write about me. I guess they can, right? That's the way to get the New York Times to write a positive story about you. If you want the New York Times to write a positive story about you, it'll never fucking happen. And so, this, or if you're like butthurt that the New York Times is not licking your balls, like they will never lick your balls. They will rape you again. You will be raped. And like it's an enormous power. I mean, just think about the power in the hands of like someone with like New York Times journalist on their resume. Like they can make anyone, they can break anyone. Imagine like you have that credential, like you go to a party, like everyone wants to talk to you because like you could turn their thing into the thing. Or you could destroy their thing, like you could make it the goat of the week, right? That's like an incredible sort of level of power. And you kind of have to be, when you're trying to succeed around power, like it's like trying to succeed with women, right? It's just like, just be amazing and they will just like naturally be into you. But like try to amaze them and they'll be like, and like try to coerce them into being amazed and they'll be like, this is the like scummiest person. Complain that women are not impressed with you. No one has ever gotten laid in this way. Right. And like, and so the thing is, when I see what people from like the old, like, boomer cultural right try to do, there's a lot of complaining. There's a lot of basically like desire to like, and it's just like, no, actually, like, the pattern that essentially has to be used to bring down these institutions is essentially the pattern that these institutions use to destroy their competitors everywhere. It's the pattern of soft power. It's the pattern of like, I am going to succeed because, it's like if you go to like Hungary, for example, like, you have this guy, Viktor Orban in Hungary, and he's really like, Hungary really is an ethno state, right, or whatever. And so he's really trying to like create the real like conservative Hungary. He's like the Franco of Hungary or something in the the 21st century, except that he didn't like actually like fight and win a giant civil war the way Franco did. But where's Franco's regime now, right? And they are like very serious about creating institutions and creating this and creating that, and like they work like very hard. And I guess my view of like the Orban thing is really best exemplified in this story of, this is something that actually happened to me. So this was in October of 2021, and I was at the Yoram Hazony's National Conservative Conference, full of like national conservatives. So there's like serious like boomers walking around, and then like the boomers like don't know who I am, and then the kids know who I am, but then they're like, when are you speaking? And I'm like, speaking? Like, I'm barely allowed to be here, man. And so I'm like doing that, and then it's like 3 a.m, and I'm like kind of fighting with my girlfriend who would dump me like 2 days later, and I can't sleep, and I go downstairs, and there's like this group of like a few people sitting around like the smoking area outside the hotel. It's in Orlando, and there's like Yoram's like crazy Israeli settler son, I really like, actually, and a couple of other people, and then there's one of these Orban dudes. And because Orban has said whatever, I don't know Orban personally, but the Hungarian contingent has come to see what they can do with American, the national conservatism or something, right? And this Hungarian guy is talking like the full Orban line. He's talking about how in Hungary, like, we're saving like European civilization, like the new Europe starts here, like this is really the rebirth of the West, like everything, all of the history of Europe, and I just like, I'm sympathetic. Like, I'm sympathetic to this person and their like goals and ideals, right? Like, I grew up as a globalist. I'm not a globalist. I don't believe in globalism. I'm like, great, Hungary should be, but I've kind of had enough. And so, I'm looking at this guy, and I pull out really my best deadpan. I can't really do this on deadpan has to be organic. It has to come out like naturally from who you are and where you are. But I'll try it, and I look at this guy with my best like confused American look on my face, and I'm like, Hungary, but isn't that in Asia? Oh my God, he almost killed me. He almost killed me. Fortunately, I was far enough that he could not cover the distance in like a single acrobatic Hungarian leap. But I was a little worried that there was some kind of ancient Hungarian martial art that might come into play, but in any case, the problem with doing that is that you can do all this shit and you really haven't changed what's cool in Hungary. Because basically, if you're like a cool kid who's like too smart for his britches, maybe there's some like Jewish DNA and you still like hanging around there, and you're just like, all of this like Europe, old whatever bullshit. Like, I could be cool. I could be listening to like Daft Punk and like doing like MDMA and mushrooms. Like, what does Viktor Orban have to offer me that like gets me as high as like, like a really solid like ketamine psychedelic cocktail? He doesn't have anything, right? Where are the Orban raves? Like, what do these people dance to? Like goulash music, right? Like, and so, there's a sense of like, no, actually, it's like much, much cooler to be like a Soros person, right? And sort of, and that's, essentially provincial. That's kind of the provincial mindset, because of course it's Hungary. I mean, what are they? I guess they're not technically in Asia, right? They're really not. That's Europe, on the books, right? But nonetheless, it's certainly a little bit to the east of Paris, if you get my drift, and so it has this kind of provincial mindset where like the last whereas like like last summer, I'm like, hanging out at like Dime Square, and I'm like talking to this person, and I'm like, hey, who are you? And I discover that they're a member of the Soros family, right?
Yeah.
So it's like basically like there's sort of a right way and a wrong way to do this, right? And if you're basically like doing it the right way, basically the children of your enemies will be found sneaking out of the house and going to your parties,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And like that's actually the way you win. The way you do not win is by basically saying, okay, we're going to like force the children of our enemies to go to patriotic Hungarian, like,
Yeah.
lush music shows with like accordions and like, no drugs except beer, right? And like so like, and if you're just like, okay, well, how do you win? By being like degenerate? I think there's a sort of Kali Yuga Bronze Age pervert answer to that. Like basically, BAP is one of the many, many, many genius things about Bronze Age pervert, who is really a historic figure in my opinion, is sort of the way that he like deals with this problem, and the way that he, rather than sort of going for this kind of like stale cultural conservatism, he's just like, no, this is more like radical and extreme and chaotic than anything that anyone has to offer. And I have it on very good authority that there's nothing at all like, there's nothing fake about Bronze Age pervert, right? There's
I've
just
heard
nothing
the
fake
same.
about him. Yeah. Did he live that lifestyle? Yes, he did.
Yeah.
And so like and you can feel it in the work. You can feel the absence of like falsity in that work, right? And so there again, you basically have like, you're showing people sort of ways of being that, well, they really do contain all of this like disruptive understanding of the past. They're actually like suitable to disrupt the present. They don't feel like they're ultimately not steps back from modernity, they're steps forward from modernity. And like when you're stepping forward, you can generally find people to follow you, and when you're stepping back, you generally can't. And at the same time, would most like trad cons think of like the Bronze Age pervert lifestyle as like, this is like degenerate modernism? Okay, maybe, but let's not ignore the fact that he can speak Attic Greek with the correct accents and tones, right? And
like there's a perennialism to it.
There's a perennialism to it, and that perennialism is sort of not like an old thing. It's like, whereas when you're being like, let's say you're like a tradcast. Like, I have a lot of respect for the tradcasts. I really respect like people for doing that. The trad, whether Catholic, Eastern Orthodox, or whatever, they're just like, no, this like actually like works for me, and it does. And yet, at a certain level, like nobody is really trad. Like when you've passed through modernity, and you're always going to be doing something that's in a way ironic there. And if you forget the ironic quality of it, you're basically doing something that's like meant for someone else. And like, you basically have to, okay, yeah, like you can make the Latin Mass like a timeless thing, which is like your thing, but don't confuse yourself with like some like Italian fishing peasant or something. Like, that's not who you are. And you basically, if you're lying about who you are, like nothing good ever came from that. I once got a letter from this woman who was sort of talking about her like kind of relationship past, and she'd had this thing where in her like very early 20s she became a tradcath e-girl, and she met a tradcath like e-boy, and they had this like incredible like romance. And then they basically, to their credit, like both realized, hey, you know what, we're both kind of faking this. and
Yeah.
they broke up. And I was like, God, you should have like bonded over that. That was like,
Yeah, no, that's
she
like
was
where
like,
the
I know, but he
yeah.
couldn't really handle it,
Yeah. Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, that sense, like, after such knowledge, what forgiveness, right? Modernity has really eaten the whole fucking apple from the fucking apple tree, right?
Yeah.
You have to deal with the consequences of that. You can't pretend that didn't happen. But, nonetheless, once you're just like sort of informed by the amazingness of the pre-modern world, especially when you realize sort of that the richer and more real, the farther back you go, the richer and more real it gets. It's like when you're trying to be a conservative and like conserve like the past world of like monarchy and chivalry and whatever in like the 19th century, it's already like quite dead. Whereas in the world of like Shakespeare or like Cervantes, it's still like alive in a sense. Like, I mean, Don Quixote is the first LARPer, right?
Yeah.
And yet, Cervantes is writing in a world where those values and that system sort of are still alive. He's writing in a world where you have like modernity is just kind of starting to, and irony really is just like starting to appear. I mean, Don Quixote is an ironic novel, right? And which is sort of amazing for how old it is. There's a lot of like irony in Shakespeare, and like, but Shakespeare already realizes that like, the future is modern essentially, and the future is like clearly modern. And yet when we have this sort of modernity that's like so stale that it just like cuts off its roots, it just becomes this like a horrible gray bureaucratic thing that just needs to be extirpated. I'm rambling, but I sense that you probably mostly agree with this.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
absolutely. I was even gonna make a little stretch like to that notion earlier. I do obviously you're no longer a libertarian, but one thing that I think is preserved, or perhaps you
I'm a recovering libertarian.
recovering libertarian, about that notion of a right-wing vision of freedom, being of spontaneous order. On my reading of your work and Unqualified Reservations, and still now, I do think there is still that romantic sense about spontaneous order and freedom. I think that's one thing, contra to the Tradcast you were mentioning. You and Bronze Age Pervert, I think, are two really great examples of thinkers that still bring that very romantic and exciting sense of freedom, perhaps in a right-wing sense, but freedom nonetheless.
Sure. And you can't. I mean, when to sort of praise order when you're like under this like suffocating bureaucracy full of rules is just like anyone in this system is just their natural impulse is like extreme individualism. When you find that basically any community or any structure that you're in is just this horrible Borg thing, you're just like, I can't be in any structure, I can't be in any group, I can't. And that's too bad because it sort of limits the kind of positive things that you can do. If you want to make a movie, you have to have a little king called the director. Like there's no other way to do it, right? And fortunately one can write a book by oneself, because if one couldn't write a book by oneself, instead of having authors, we would have directors. And but you can't make a movie by yourself, and that's why you need a director, but it's still so you have an auteur instead of an author. Same difference, right? And so that the thing that is easily lost when you sort of fetishize freedom is sort of the kind of glorious experience of community and of like structured, of not just community, which is kind of flat and maybe longhousey, but even like hierarchy, and there are many very LARPy, horrible ways to do hierarchy in the modern world, but it's still like something that's there and that's relevant. When I see basically the level of frankly, hero worship that BAP generates, I'm just like, you're doing it exactly right. Like you are basically, have figured out how to be a hero, and how to be a rock star, and you're like being a hero and you're being a rock star, and you're making, I'm pretty sure Bap is making bank off his podcast, and he works like a dog. He works so hard. I'm so impressed with that man. You know, and like sort of like everything is okay, you know, that's like an army of one still, but like, you know, sort of everything like there's definitely like critical mass out there for a scene, whereas like, you know, 10 years ago there just wasn't. And the like, where are you from, you know, 10 years from now, is you have a lot more people than BAP who are making bank and making, and then it becomes a different thing. It becomes a like, you know, but yeah, I'm just like, this is there's enough of a society out there. There's enough of a critical mass. People on the outside of it want to get in.
Yeah, the energy is there.
Yeah, the energy is there, right? You know, and you know, that's like, you know, energy and talent is basically all you need. You know, go out and make shit. And you know, and like, it's really, once you're, you know, outside the need of, I mean, you know, it's just like, you know, Delicious Tacos is making this short film. I just like so want to see this film, because it will be a 10-minute film that you will fucking remember. and like, think about how much like unforgettable, like, my God, like fucking films are bad enough, you know, Hollywood film is bad enough, but like fucking short films, oh my God, right? You know, like the just the awfulness is just like everywhere. And you know, yeah, it's like, I don't, you know, one of the sort of tests for like, are you gonna win, son, right? One of the tests for are you gonna win is basically, okay, if, you know, if I'm on the winning team, basically I expect that team to win. So, you know, if I'm a completely amoral person who doesn't give a fuck about anything and just like wants to get ahead, what team am I going to join? What am I going to do? Right? You know, and the thing is, if you can get that force on your side, eventually it comes with a problem, which is you get a lot of shitheads in your parties, right? Who just want to be there because it's a thing. Okay. At some point you're going to have to deal with that if you're going to succeed. But like, you know, if you basically are at the point where those people want to be on your side, like the writer of this fucking piece in the New York Times, then that's how you know you're actually winning. You know, how you know you're losing. Conversely, like, you basically like go back to like the Red Scare, right? You know, would you rather be, as a young amoral dude, would you rather be on Senator McCarthy's staff or Edward R. Murrow's staff? Well, you know, basically when McCarthy is running around scaring everyone, and you sort of don't realize that he's actually the underdog and very much the weaker party in this situation, but like hindsight will tell you that basically anyone who associated with him got wrecked. And you know, it's like at the start of the Trump administration realizing, oh wow, he has all these great appointments to, you know, hand out, maybe that'll look good on people's resumes. No, it won't. You know, basically anyone who took any of the like candies that President Trump had to hand out all got wrecked. And the like, that shows you that was inevitable in retrospect, and it shows you that you're basically not on a winning path. Whereas often the winning path, if you're doing something that's a little edgy, a little out there, you know, the winning path, and I think that's true sort of now for a lot of this stuff, is maybe, you know, someone really immoral will kind of like flirt with it and then like cross over like a little too soon or something like that. You know, you saw people doing this like in the punk industrial scene. Like, you know, a lot of people were very hard on like 9-inch Nails, believe it or not, back in the day, because they were just like, this is like way like you're like branding this as like industrial music, but this is like really like radio friendly, like pop industrial, right? You know, and it was, right, you know, and it made Trent Reznor freaking huge. And you know, I'm like, okay, you know, if that's the way it goes, Trent Reznor is enormously talented, and yet there was definitely an edge of like, oh, I see, like this is really, It's even like the first Nine Inch Nails album is in some ways like a better example of like the perfect sellout than Nirvana, and
Yeah.
the and it was perfect.
It's a
And
good
like
album,
and so, but the thing that created that was basically, 10 years of like, people getting together like in the back alleys and like, creating like little labels like Wax Tracks and like, doing stuff that like nobody knew or expected would
Right.
win. And it's
Oh,
like
yeah.
those sort of much more thankless periods that create the energy that you're going to
Yeah.
need to like sell out when it's time to sell
When
out.
it's time to sell out.
Um,
Yeah.
all right. Any one last question? I should go. Like I got taxes to do. I got
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. Well, so I was going to say that this all sounds to me, to bring it back to your Elf v. Hobbit post,
yeah.
that this is describing power of the elves to create
Yeah.
culture. And that's how you win, son,
Ultimately,
by
that's how you
creating
win, son. All
culture.
culture is high culture. Get to like if you grew up as a hobbit, great people like basically like, use that, your abuela as a hobbit or whatever. Don't unfortunately, there's really no market for like a hobbit race opera yet. Like, but maybe someday. But like, that there's no market for it only makes it like more real and more genuine. Like that's great. Like maybe a race opera can actually be like real in that way. It's like John Dolan's like Pleasant Hill or something. You know, even that is a little like it doesn't quite have the right dissident vibe. But I like John Dolan, but he's a boomer. But the war nerd, if you know his work. But the yeah, like you have to. There's nothing workable that doesn't involve like passing through modernity, learning the lessons of modernity, unless you just want to go like straight up like be Amish and like stay Amish. But you can't become Amish. Like nobody
Yeah.
can do that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so, but that doesn't mean that you don't have a hell of a lot to learn from the Amish. You do, but the thing is, everything new needs to also, in a way, succeed by the standards, and by the standards I mean the sort of the most fundamental standards of the old. And so right now we have elf ruled America, and the thing that is like so disturbing about to people about Bronze Age pervert bothers people a lot more than you know I don't know who is even the like are TV evangelists even a thing anymore, right?
I don't think so. Joel Osteen.
Because
Yeah.
Joel Osteen, sure. Because the thing is that basically, Bronze Age pervert is on the inside. Bronze Age pervert has basically succeeded by the standards of the old regime. And that's just this sort of very powerful and like toxic energy. And so you have to become like, if you grew up as a hobbit and you're out there and you're watching this like as a 14-year-old hobbit, like you will get farther by like reading the collected works of Michelle Welbeck than by reading the collected works of Jordan Peterson. Like this is a fact. This is sad. This is true. Jordan Peterson himself is not. It's not like Jordan Peterson hasn't passed through modernity. Actually, I guess I can say this because there's no chance that anything like this is like a bad Hollywood movie idea that Hadrian and I had a while ago, and this could never be made. So I'm just going to spill the beans, right here on the New Right podcast.
Excellent.
The idea is it's a road picture, and the characters are Steve Coogan. Do you know Steve Coogan? He does these great British road movies. He did 24-Hour Party People,
Yes.
which was
Yes.
the very, very, very funny guy, Steve Coogan. I love his work. He did a Tristram Shandy adaptation, which was wonderful. So if you can imagine Steve Coogan as Tristram Shandy, it's perfect. I mean, Tristram Shandy is basically like the first postmodern novel anyway, right? And and I mean, Don Quixote is ironic, but Tristram Shandy is like downright postmodern and from the 18th century. And the early 18th century even, and I think, and so Steve Coogan, and he's playing Jordan Peterson, and then we have George Clooney, and he's playing Hunter Biden, and they're together in a rehab in Serbia, and they break out of the rehab, and they find life and love on the road, and the film is called Bucko. And, I mean, you can see it like clear as day. I don't know if you've seen any of Jordan Peterson's like post rehab appearances. Like, he's not the same. I don't know what they did to him in that clinic, but it didn't, you know, the benzos like took something, you know. But yeah, I mean, you know, Jordan Peterson's path kind of indicates that. I mean, he's really like, he's trying to sort of restore like the civilizational values that he grew up in, you know, and make them accessible to like teenagers today. And, you know, it sort of works in a lot of ways, but ultimately it's kind of not real. Whereas the wild fantasies of, you know, Bronze Age pervert who's, I think his Twitter bio used to read something like the return of, you know, the rebirth of vitalism, the return of the spirit of the Bronze Age, the destruction of the cities in fire. And that to me is much more realistic than like clean your room in a sense, right?
Yes.
And the, I mean, some might say porte no nos dos, but you know, the like that's one way to clean your room. But yeah, you know, there's a way in which, you know, there's a kind of sense of freedom and possibility which is captured in Bap and in Welbeck and in these people who, you know, sort of have this very ambivalent relationship to pre-modern values, to the point where, you know, Welbeck is just like, well, I'll fuck anything that moves, so we should have Islam or something like that, you know. And that makes more sense actually than like Jordan Peterson. And I have nothing against like Jordan Peterson, but he's just like, it's clearly like it doesn't have that kind of staying power. You can't imagine, you know, who's going to be reading Jordan Peterson in like 50 years. Whereas I can imagine that even when people have no idea who Mitt Romney was, they'll be chuckling over, you know, the story of the modern Alcibiades, you know.
Yes.
And, yeah. All right. Any last notes? I really should go.
No, just thank you so much for coming on.
All right.
This was an amazing chat, and
thank you, Curtis.
Yeah, it was great. Well, I'll look you up when I'm down in LA sometime.
Please do.
Matthew, you're in LA, right? Yeah,
that's correct.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. I have a LA trip soon, so.
Oh, great. Yeah, let me know. My email.
We'll
so let's set up.
All right.
Take care.
All right, take care. Super fun. Bye.
Bye.